Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Chariwag, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I am coordinating the paper on Sociology of Gender. Today we are going to discuss the module Cinema, Gender and Identity. In this module, we will explore why construction of gender identities could be seen on the site of cinema. We will also develop a nuanced understanding of the meaning of identity. Further, we will analyze gender identities both in terms of its theoretical and methodological issues. Further, we will develop the whole idea of identity in terms of its construction of femininity, masculinity and alternative modernities. Further, we will discuss about popular identities in societies. Foucault supported the view that identities are constructed from materials available to people and advanced the idea that one of the key technologies of the self is discourse. He proposed that discourses shape the way we perceive the world and our own selves. According to Foucault, discourses describe a certain way of speaking. However, discourses are not about objects. They do not identify objects, they constitute them, and in the practice of doing so, conceal their own invention. Discourse is not limited to spoken language but also indicates written language and visuals, and thus books, newspapers, magazines, movies and television form the part of a discourse in modern societies. Thus, discourse is in fact the narration of reality as it is presented to us through media or other cultural texts. If identities are formed from the materials available to people in popular discourse, one need to trace the history of Hindi cinema as a popular discourse to see how identities are constructed in cinema through the various decades of it. As Jyotika Virdi states, popular cinema inherits and circulates notion of national identity, producing new representations of nation and constructing a collective consciousness of nationhood through special cultural referent. Similarly, this module sees how identities around gender are constructed and circulated through Hindi cinema. A social identity is a portion of an individual's self-concept derived from perceived membership in a relevant social group. As originally formulated by Tafadjal and Turner, social identity is a way in which one explains intergroup behavior. Social identity is a person's sense of who they are based on the group membership. They proposed that the groups which people belong to were an important source of pride and self-esteem. A sociological approach to the self and identity becomes with the assumption that there is a reciprocal relationship between the self and society. The self influences the society through the actions of individuals, thereby creating groups, organizations, networks and institutions. Reciprocally, society influences the self through its shared language and meanings that enable a person to take the role of the other, engage in social interaction and reflect upon oneself as an object. The latter process of reflexivity constitutes the core of selfhood. Because the self emerges in and is reflective of society, the sociological approach to understanding the self and its parts identities means that we must also understand the society in which the self is acting, and keep in mind that the self is always acting in a social context in which other selves exist. There are various axes of identities. The dominant ones are gender, ethnicity, class, age, disability and sexuality. There are other axes of identity too, for example, education, urban, rural residency, cultural background, criminal record, refugee status, physical attributes like overweight, tall, short. Although gender is the only one part of an individual's sense of self, gender is more or less central to their self-identity. Sex and gender are the two of one of the most important ways that humans classify themselves and other people. Your answer to who you are may well begin with I am a man or I am a woman. Gender identity refers to an individual's person's sense of identity as masculine or feminine or a combination thereof. According to Davies, the division of people into male and female is central to our discussions and to our understanding of identity. Gender identities are popularly seen in terms of masculinity and femininity. However, we need to look at alternative sexualities and how they construct gender identities such as gay, lesbian and bisexuals. Recently, we see a lot of acceptance of sexual diversities. How are gender identities constructed? Although the formation of gender identity is not completely understood, many factors have been suggested as influencing its development. In particular, the extent to which it is determined by socialization, environmental factors versus innate biological factors is an ongoing debate in social sciences known as nature versus nurture. Both factors are thought to play a role. Biological factors that influence gender identity include pre- and postnatal hormonal levels. While genetic makeup also influences gender identity, it does not inflexibly determine it. Social factors which may influence gender identity include ideas regarding gender roles conveyed by family, authority figures, mass media, and other influential people in a child's life. According to McNamara, from the beginning of the 20th century, sex and sexuality have been identified as fundamental elements of identity. Over the years, various theorists have contributed to our understanding of gender identity. However, the most influential and controversial theory of development of gender identity is that of Freud. Freud and the movement of psychoanalytic thinking that he spawned focused attention on sex and sexuality as a key determinants in a wider range of human behavior and perceptions. According to Freud, the learning of gender differences in infants and young children is centered on possession or absence of the penis. However, Freud was careful to say that it is not just the anatomical distinction that matter here. After a 5-year-old to puberty is a latency period as far as erotic desires are concerned, and during the latency period, children have already internalized male or female identities and a sense of superiority or inferiority associated with it. Freud has been criticized for identifying gender identity too closely with genital awareness and missing on subtle factors like cultural factors. Nancy emphasizes on children's emotional attachment with the mother, since the mother is the most dominant influence in the early life of the infant. In order to achieve a separate sense of self, the child is required to become less dependent upon the mother. According to her, boys gain a sense of self via a more radical rejection of their original closeness to the mother by forging their understanding of masculinity from what it is not feminine. She claims that as a result, boys become less skilled in relating to others and take a more active view of their lives, emphasizing achievement. The sociological approach to understanding the self emphasizes that the self emerges in and is reflective of society. Therefore, our understanding of the self and its parts identities means that we must also understand the society in which the self is acting, and keep in mind that the self is always acting in a social context in which other selves exist. One would add that in today's mediated world, one cannot ignore media and its various forms if one wants to understand society and the world around us. Foucault's idea of self-identity and sexuality and his interest in modes of living can help to develop our understanding of identities and media in the modern society. Foucault shows that particular ways of talking shape the way we perceive the world and our own selves. We often talk about people as if they have particular qualities, they have an identity. For example, we believe that at the heart of the person there is a fixed and true identity of character. Foucault rejected this view. For Foucault, people do not have a real identity within themselves. An identity is communicated to others in your interactions with them, but this is not a fixed thing within a person. It's a shifting temporary construction. Below are some of the popular ways in which gender identities can be categorized. Femininity, contingent, framed and shaped by male beliefs, behaviors and demands. Normalized, women playing secondary role to women, continually struggles with the problem of producing femininity that secures male approval. Sexualized, fashion through the male eye and fantasies, women as sexual objects for male gratification. Assertive, this reflects changing position of women in society. Girl power, emphasizing on sex as fun, importance of female friendships, represents a way of coping with masculinity. Modernized, slightly older age group, desire for personal freedom and expression within the context of traditional gender relations. Aging, right of elderly women to be fashionable, active and sexual beings. Autonomous, competition with men on female terms, frees women from traditional constraints, likely to be highly educated, successful, professional, middle class, career focused. Women who tend to form heterosexual non-committal relationships may include marriage, but children are unlikely. Masculinity, subordinate, generally lesser form of masculinity, particularly for men unable or unwilling to perform hegemonic masculinity. Subversive, alternative masculinity that challenges and undermines hegemonic masculinity. Complicit, newly feminized masculinities combine paid work with domestic work, who see women as equal and occurs between women are getting more powerful, male identities have begun to change. Marginalized men who have been pushed to the margins no longer feel able to perform traditional masculine roles due to reasons like long-term unemployment. Retributive aim to reclaim traditional masculinity from emasculated peers. Typical behaviors include binge drinking, fighting, etc. This identity is rigidly patriarchal, aggressive, oppositional, and reclamational. Hypermasculinity, authoritarian and autocratic, impersonal, conceptuous, and violent. Very image of patriarchy particularly appeals to the white middle class and middle-aged men because of its ability to provide certainty of what it means to be a masculine. These are popular gender identity constructs in most of the society. Media in general and cinema in particular reproduces as well as constructs these gender identities in a very vigorous manner. Media and identity. Today, popular media are obviously primary channels for dissemination of prevailing discourses. The discourses about sexuality and identity are strong ones, enthusiastically spreaded by the media and consumed by audiences. Sexuality is seen as a key to happiness and knowing your own true self. According to Foucault, in modern life, we have to establish an ethics and a mode of living. He views the subject as constituted entirely within the discursive practices of disciplinary regimes and repeated performance of the technologies of the self. In discussing how identity is produced, Stuart Hall says identity is always constituted within, not outside representation. In other words, we cannot escape the representation of our gender and form our gender identity frame within representations of it. Barker Chris emphasizes that identity is culturally specific. Production identities are wholly social constructions and cannot exist outside of cultural representations. The resources that form the material for an identity project, namely language and cultural practices, are social in character. According to the feminist writer Butler, apart from the operative meaning within a political process, representation is also a normative function of a language, which is said either to reveal or to distort what is assumed to be true. Representation uses different signs to generate meaning within a particular context, that is discourse. These signs are part of the discourse. Mass media have been identified as primary sites of discourse which influence culture, individual social structure and political policy, and also reflect social, political and intellectual views and attitudes. Media and communications are a central element of modern life, while gender and sexuality remain at the core of how we think about our identities. In modern societies, people typically consume many hours of media through which a lot of information goes into people's head. We are affected by these experiences. In particular, cinema contains so many images of women and men and messages about men, women and sexuality today, it is highly unlikely that these ideas would have no impact on our own sense of identity. It is natural that people somehow copy or borrow their identities from the media, cinema. This media shows us situations and relationships from the other people's point of view. Several scholars have opinion that cinema is more than just an audiovisual form of entertainment. It needs to be studied as an integral part of a particular culture in whose socio-political and economic ethos it is deeply rooted. Marxist, feminist and social researchers argue and present considerable evidence that media content is never just entertainment, that it is never politically or ideologically innocent, that the mass media send messages to viewers about the way things are, can be or should be. Construction of gender identities in cinema. Cinema as a popular discourse has the capacity to subvert the order as well as reaffirm the normative. This section mainly looks at the ways in which cinema constructs gender identities either by subverting or reaffirming the normative order. In this section, I will be mainly looking at the most popular films in the last few decades as a part of the discourse. One is aware that there are few genres which are looking at women in the more rational and egalitarian ways, looking at the sexual desires as legitimate, the career choices as essential element of their identities, commenting on violence on women, realistic terms, and advocating women's rights in feminist ways. However, one needs to admit that these films are in a minority. They are made for and watched by a niche audience and thus don't form the dominant discourse. On the other hand, popular cinema constructs dominant ideology which is necessarily Hindu, patriarchal, upper caste, upper middle class. This dominant ideology has very long lasting impact on identity formations and especially gender identities. As mentioned in the earlier session, identities are not formed outside representations but within cultural representations, and therefore necessary to see representations in popular discourse. Therefore, this section looks at these cultural representations which are popular and has long-lasting impact on the masses. Femininity. Women's identity in media in general and cinema in particular is derivative in the sense that it is derived from the man they are associated with. Women are seen as somebody's wife, mother, daughter, daughter-in-law, and very rarely women are seen as independent. They are represented in binaries and in public and private, which are also on the screen, translated into a binary of woman of the family against a career-oriented who is alienated from all her homely duties. Woman in private domain is predominantly seen as mother. If you look at the above mentioned categories, feminine identities, one can see that most of the feminine identities in popular cinema are normalized and sexualized identities rather than assertive and autonomous. In my article published elsewhere, where I argued that this new woman of the post-1990s is educated, modern, at the same time chooses tradition over modernity in most of the situations. Traditions are not thrust on her, but rather that is her choice. Women in हम आपके हैं कौन, हम साथ साथ हैं, कभी खुशी कभी गम, दिलवाले दुल्हनिया ले जाएंगे are represented as mothers, wives, sisters, sister-in-law. Their identity is always derivative and always defined in terms of kinship to a man. These women are necessarily housewives, and although occasional reference is made to their educational qualifications and career, but these identities are never foregrounded, they are never shown at the workplaces. For example, Madhuri Dixit in Hum Aapke Hain Kaun is a computer scientist, but in no frame she is shown even in remote proximity of a computer. Similarly, Sonali Bendre in Hum Saath Saath Hain is a doctor by profession, but the measure of her true worth is determined by whether she can make Gajar ka halwa for Salman Khan. Happily enclosed within the confines of the home, these women recognize that being a Sidi Sadi, simple and undemanding woman is the main qualification needed to achieve the status in the family. The ultimate identity of all women of all ages and of all their decisions at different points of time reveal that the primary identity is to be a maternal one. Going back to the history in the initial decades of Hindi cinema, women were glorified as mothers. In the nationalist project of redefining Indian women, woman was always recasted as chaste, sacrificing, caring mother. P. Shantaram, a self-proclaimed nationalist modernist filmmaker who was known for his ideas about women's liberation, finally encapsulated women in the image of self-sacrificing, repenting mother. Therefore, I argue that the majority of his female characters are challenging the normative order and has the potential to transgress the order, but at the end, they all submit to patriarchy and find fulfillment in the role as a mother. The family clean films of the post-1990s are no exception. Rather, one can say they are more aggressive than the earlier ones. Jaya Bachchan in Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum is a passive woman who cannot defy her husband's will and who can only watch the arrival of her son at a distance, meets the audience throughout the film as only as a mother. In Hum Aapke Hain Kaun, Bindu, who is a Mamiji, the only quasi-villainous character, becomes good only when she is pregnant. In fact, she is able to conceive only when she realizes her mistakes and promises to behave properly. Similarly, the frolicky heroine of Hum Aapke Hain Kaun, who sacrifices her love in order to mother her sister's child, fits into the construct of the self-sacrificing mother. The question as to who can become a mother, which is central to the Hindu discourse, is also central to these films. The answer is that only those who are pure, chaste and good-hearted are worthy of attaining the status of mother, is perfectly in tune with that of the family genre of the films and Sangh Parivar's notions. Most of the popular films sees women as bearer and transmitters of tradition and culture. The women in all these films are living symbols of Hindu tradition and culture. The ornaments that they wear, the sindoor and the bangles, the observance of rituals like the Karwa Chauth, all symbolizes the conformity with tradition. In Kabhi Khushi Gum, Kajal's restlessness on the day of Karwa Chauth because she does not receive a traditional gift from her mother-in-law symbolizes this tradition-bearing role. She is not only the bearer but also the transmitter of Indian values. Though she lives in London, it is these values that she will inculcate in her son. The depiction of Indian culture and tradition is seen based on sacrifice and family values, with the belighting of the individual signifying the triumph of tradition over modernity. Morning aartis become a major event in the family, as do celebrations marking religious rituals. Our large extended families are knit through the rituals. There are also occasions for the elaborate and ostentatious display of expensive clothes and jewelry. The marriage of piety and consumerism could not have been more explicit. These films redefine the attributes of a good wife and a good bahu, that is daughter-in-law. Kajol in Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham is very restless and longs for the unification of Shah Rukh Khan with his family and supports Hrithik Roshan in his attempts to unite the family. She at some level blames herself for Shah Rukh Khan's dismissal from family. As a good bahu, she perceives her role as that of a homemaker and is convinced of the need for a family unity despite the unfair treatment meted to her by her in-laws because of her lower middle class status. These linkages between Sri Shakti ideology of the Sangh Parivar and these redefinitions are so clear that BJP Mahila Morcha ex-President Mridula Sinha comment is, women's realm of work and responsibility is the home. Most of the times a woman is responsible for the unrest in the family. Seems straight out of a film of this genre. In the ideal joint family, claims of individual members, sexual relations of husband and wife, biological relationship of parent and child are subordinated to the larger interest as decided by the patriarch. In Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham, when Shah Rukh Khan marries Kajol against his father's Amitabh Bachchan's wishes, he is the only one who can decide whether the former can continue to be a part of the family or not. He is an authority that even the rebel does not and cannot question. The collectivity of the family is confined to rituals, either early morning puja or arati on different religious occasions, and these occasions are depicted as epitome of happy united joint family. I would also like to add that the obedience has always remained at the center of the family ties outside the home and outside parivar. A woman before marriage is desired to be in the role of an obedient daughter within the family. For example, Kajol in DDLJ asking for 1 month of her own life from her father, and Tabu in Chinikam asking for permission to marry the man she loves who does not fit the norms of marriage or only shades apart in this regard. Kajol DDLJ is submissive, traditional, young, innocent daughter and fits perfectly into an obedient normative pattern, whereas in contrast, Tabu meets her audience as an independent, confident, mature lady, has a mind of her own and is ready to go against the normative. However, both of them are finally encapsulated into the same identity of caring and obedient daughters. Tabu's character has a potential to transgress the norms and take her decision independently to marry the man of her choice and challenge all traditional expectations from a correct match. In the end, Tabu and Kajol get what they want, permission to marry the man of the choice, but only by being ideal obedient daughters. Popular discourse also shows amply the cost of non-obedience in the form of repentant daughters or honor killer. Thus, popular cinema re-emphasizes the obedient daughters as primary identity for women before marriage. The same obedience because the critical trait of being a good wife post-marriage. In 1930s, while recasting ideal Indian women, chastity and purity were identified as the hallmarks of Indian traditional women and pitted against the Western women. Women with political power were assumed to be contaminating this pure and chaste Indian woman and questioning their femininity. Apprehensions about women losing their feminine identity were widely expressed in legislative assemblies and in different popular discourses. These anxieties and apprehensions were emphatically expressed on the site of cinema as popular discourse of 1930s. For example, in V. Shantaram Samarjyoti and Maya Machindra, women with political power were essentially shown with masculine, aggressive and cruel behavior and in the end repent this unnatural behavior. Queen Kilotala from Maya Machindra is able to revive her dead son when she pits her Pativrata identity, what Machindra and Gorakhnath with their enormous tapasya failed to achieve. Kilotala is then convinced that her true essence is not in achieving political power as a queen but as an obedient, regulated wife. These women prefer to go back to the feminine motherly instincts as the true essence of their identity. Thus, I argue that giving up political power essentially makes women ideal mothers and wives, which in turn gives them power as mother and Pativata. As Uma Chakravarti claims, the success of any system may be seen in the subtle working of its ideology, and in that sense, a Pativata concept can be regarded as a master stroke of a genius of Hindu normative order as expressed in its cultural values for women. It was one of the most successful ideologies constructed by any patriarchal system, one in which women themselves control their own sexuality and believe that they gain power and respect through the codes that they adopted. She further argues that the Stri Dharma or the Pativata Dharma is an ideological mechanism for controlling the biological aspect of woman, which represents wild or untamed nature. Through the Stri Dharma, the biological woman can be tamed and converted into woman as a social entity. The ultimate social control is achieved when subordinated women not only accept their condition but actually regard it as a mark of distinction. Be it Kajol or Jaya Bachchan or in Kabhi Khushi Gum or Madhu in Roja and many other films cross genres, women's primary identity has been emphasized as obedient, caring and compassionate, supportive wife. In today's context, popular discourses still sees women in binaries of public and private. Either women are shown as obedient wives in private or in public sphere on the parameters set for men. Going to the other extreme, film like Ki and Ka naively addresses the issue of women's essential role as an obedient housewife and mother by simply subverting the order. Woman as breadwinner and man as house husband. Woman as rational and man as emotional. To some extent, it does challenge the sexual division of labor, though superficially. It does not address the fact that most women do not have a choice in accepting or rejecting to be a housewife. Most of the Indian girls are brought up with the expectation that they do not have to prove their identity as a breadwinner, rather they do have a potential to survive and earn in a competitive world. Thus, they have to depend on the future husband as providers, and housewifery is a natural choice. When men choose housewifery like Ki and Ka, let us analyze the issues of masculinity that emerge. Masculinity. Seidler says that men were supposed to be impersonal, career-oriented breadwinners providing support for their wives and families, a shoulder that others should depend on. Industrial age men were raised to be an utilitarian versus ornamental existence. Follow the comments, work provided a truth on which man's life could be securely founded. Of that security grew authority, authority based as in the root meaning of the word on having authored something productive. Historian Blum's description of the inherent virtues of husbandmen further explains this role and source of identity for men during the 2 centuries of industrialization. The role of men in modern societies has changed markedly in the past few decades. The roles and identities available to men today are either no longer unique to them or have been substantially diminished. As Srivastava puts it, masculinity is socially produced ways of being a male. Masculine cultures infuse all significant aspects of modern life, and masculinity refers to socially produced ways of being male. That is to say, men learn to be men, and this learning is expressed both in terms of social structures as well as the ways in which men present themselves in everyday life. In the Indian context, in the last decade, we see the markers of masculinity undergoing changes and new understanding of masculinity emerging. In the realm of advertisement, we see new metrosexual man emerging, a caring father, a supportive husband sharing domestic work, taking up responsibility of children in their health and hygiene, shopping for the household. However, popular cinema is majorly engaged with a man's identity as an aggressive, violent and authoritative patriarch. They are engaged in manly professions and primary breadwinners. The hero of popular cinema meets the audience as a macho man, although in fits and starts a sensitive side is exposed. The macho Salman Khan in Naam, Bajrangi Bhaijaan, Sultan and other film cries and displays his emotions, but a strong macho identity otherwise carries through this weak sentimental side. Ki and Ka, on the other hand, supposedly subverts the gender roles when Arjun Kapoor and Kareena Kapoor switch breadwinner and housework. Arjun Kapoor Ka becomes being a handsome, muscular man who was a topper of IIM and a son of a wealthy businessman opting out of rat race. Voluntary and choosing to be a house husband definitely needs to be read more carefully and politically. In a competitive world, he has already proved himself as a very successful person by scoring the highest in a premier institution like IIM, and thus can afford to opt out of the race without attaching a stigma of failure to it. This forces us to think, what if the hero was not so manly, without a beard, without a hairy chest and not enough macho to protect his wife from hooligans at night in Delhi, a college dropout, not so creative when it comes to home decor, a failure in worldly terms. Would the audience have accepted that identity as even acceptable masculine identity? Alternative sexuality. However, popular cinema takes up this discourse within an enclosure of comedy. Many people have expressed it positively and welcomed the change, saying that at least the issue of alternative sexuality is out of the closet. For example, in Dostana, all through the film, gay relations are treated with humor without challenging the heteronormative marital norms. However, while establishing gay relations as a socially existing form of sexuality, it clearly sends a message that they are not acceptable or desirable forms. John Abraham and Abhishek Bachchan pretend to be gay and follow the heterosexual marital norms of Griha Pravesh, family Kangan gifts, and observing Karwa Chauth. The treatment given to the issue of gay sexuality is in a sense marks and deflect the real issue faced by homosexuals. The comic treatment makes it easy to get over the homophobia and reinforces stereotypes about their mannerisms which are already well established in society. Films like Aligarh, Bombay Talkies and Fire, which depict homosexuality realistically, do not become a part of the popular cinema. Alternative sexual identities are portrayed on two ends of the spectrum, either as comical characters which are easily accepted and laughed at as quirky, such as Dostana, or stigmatized, criminalized and beaten up by the system, Aligarh, Bombay Talkies and Fire. After discussing the module Gender, Cinema and Identity, there are few issues that have come up. One, the idea that identities are constructed needs to be kept in mind, and these identities are constructed from available discourses. Further, we need to recognize that identities is not fixed, but rather shifting. It is temporary, therefore dynamic, and it keeps on constructing in terms of time and space. Further, if we try to link identities with cinema, we need to understand that cinema is a site of popular discourse, which further allows masculine, feminine, alternative sexual identities as constructed on the sites of popular cinema, as has been discussed in this module.